Imagine standing on a sidewalk, just on a random Tuesday. You're holding a folder that's just crammed with Social Security forms.
Right, the classic bureaucratic nightmare.
Exactly. You're stressing out about getting a stamp, tapping your foot on the pavement, completely unaware that literally inches beneath the soles of your shoes lies an ancient Roman burial chamber.
Wow.
Or like, imagine being the brilliant visionary who redraws the map of an entire metropolis from a pile of smoldering ashes. But then you run for local office later and suffer a defeat so humiliating it almost defies mathematical probability.
It's wild, honestly. I mean, cities are really masters of deception. They present themselves to us as these fixed, logical grids of asphalt and concrete, but in reality, they're much closer to a computer hard drive that just keeps getting overwritten.
Yeah, the old files are never fully erased. They just get buried under the new operating system.
Exactly.
Well, welcome to this deep dive into the source material. Right up front, I want to mention that this specific exploration is a proud part of the podcast. The Street Has Its Own Story by Giannis Stefanidis.
It's a fantastic series to be part of.
It really is. And our mission today is to peel back the layers of that overwritten hard drive. We're taking you on a virtual walk down Angelaki Street in Thessaloniki. But we're not just walking horizontally from the university to the sea. We're going to read this straight vertically.
Digging straight down.
Right, from subterranean ancient rituals up through mid-century modern steel, all the way to the bustling, neon-lit student and media hub that's pulsing along those sidewalks today.
Because Angelaki Street is, it's really the ultimate urban microcosm. Every single era of Thessaloniki's dramatic history has violently asserted itself on this one specific stretch of land.
Yeah.
To understand how a city breathes, how it breaks, and how it desperately rebuilds itself, you have to look at the people who actually drew the lines on the map.
Which brings us to the man whose name is literally on the street signs, Konstantinos Angelakis, born in 1874, lived all the way to 1965. And looking at the biographical sources, Overachiever honestly barely covers it.
Not even close.
He was a prominent doctor, a massive landowner with these sprawling estates out in Tagarades and near Radestos, and just a central figure of the early 20th century Greek bourgeoisie.
He even co-founded a wire manufacturing factory in 1931. That was with other notable figures like Carolus Modiano and Moises Herreras.
So he's got his hands in medicine, heavy industry, agriculture, and civic administration.
Right, which drops him right into the center of a massive geopolitical crisis. In 1916, Greece was paralyzed by what historians call the national schism.
The country was basically torn in two.
Completely. On one side, you had King Constantine, who wanted Greece to remain neutral in World War I. And on the other side, you had Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos, who fiercely believed Greece needed to ally with the British and the French.
And this wasn't just some polite political disagreement, you know? Venizelos actually leaves Athens, travels up to Thessaloniki, and sets up a rival provisional government.
Backed by a military movement called National Defense, yeah.
So Thessaloniki essentially becomes the capital of a breakaway Greek state. And in the middle of this unprecedented turmoil, Venizelos appoints Konstantinos Angelakis as the very first Greek mayor of the city.
Which is a monumental task for an appointed mayor, just navigating a fractured city during a global war. But then, in August 1917, the unthinkable happens. The Great Fire at Thessaloniki breaks out.
It just burns relentlessly. 32 hours.
Yeah, devouring almost the entire historical, commercial, and residential center of the city. We're talking tens of thousands of people suddenly homeless. Centuries of architectural heritage reduced to a blank, smoldering canvas.
And Angelakis doesn't just manage the immediate humanitarian crisis of all those ashes. He becomes a vital architect of the recovery.
He is appointed to the Special International Architectural Committee, led by the famous French architect, Ernest Debraj.
And their mandate was staggering. It wasn't just, hey, fix the buildings. It was to completely redesign the urban plan from scratch.
The sources show us how aggressively Angelakis pushed for this modernization. There's this fascinating letter dated January 29, 1920, from Angelakis directly to Prime Minister Venizelos.
He's practically begging for money, right?
Literally begging the national government for immediate assistance and funding to finish the preliminary work for a new municipal palace and a new centralized market. He was deeply personally invested in the physical rebirth of the city. He looked at total devastation and saw a modern European grid.
So he's literally the guy in the room drawing the modern streets that citizens are walking on today. You would logically assume that steering a major city through a catastrophic fire and redesigning its future would make him a universally beloved civic hero.
Right, you'd think he'd coast into elected office on a wave of overwhelming gratitude.
Exactly. But that assumption is entirely wrong. His term as the appointed mayor ends in 1920. A few years later, when Democratic municipal elections are finally held, he decides to put his name on the ballot.
And it does not go well.
No. In 1925, he runs for mayor. He comes in second. That election is annulled due to irregularities, so they run it again. And he comes in second again, losing to Patricios.
But he doesn't stop there.
He dusts himself off, tries again in 1929. This time, he comes in third. He captures just over 12% of the vote. And then he makes one final desperate attempt in 1930. He finishes in fifth place.
Fifth place.
Out of the entire voting population of the city he helped rebuild, Konstantinos Angelakis pulls in an absolutely staggering 1.1% of the vote.
Which is exactly 368 people.
I mean, how does that happen?
Well, the mechanism behind that disconnect is a fascinating lesson in political science. Being a visionary technocrat who can sit in a committee room with French architects and design brilliant urban infrastructure, that doesn't automatically translate to retail politics.
Right, the handshaking and baby kissing.
Exactly. Angelakis was fiercely, uncompromisingly loyal to the Venozalist faction. And by the mid to late 1920s, that political base was deeply fractured at the local level. In that 1925 election, rival candidates from within his own broader ideological camp were splitting the vote.
And throwing his support behind the dictator Theodoros Pangalos a year later probably didn't do wonders for his democratic credentials either.
No, it alienated a huge swath of the voting public. He was a brilliant administrator, but he clearly lacked the populist touch needed to unite a divided electorate.
So his legacy was never going to be cemented by the ballot box.
No, it was cemented by asphalt and concrete. He lost the voters, but he won the permanent geography of the city, which is the only reason you were walking down Angelaki Street today and not Patricio Street.
And that geography is exactly where we need to focus next. Angelakis designed the modern surface of the city, like the top layer of our hard drive. But to truly understand this street, we have to look past the surface grid he plotted out and look directly beneath the pavement.
Down to the building at Angelaki 37.
Yes, this is the exact spot where the timeline of the street becomes this crazy architectural double exposure. Two entirely different eras existing in the exact same physical space.
Today, Angelaki 37 houses the IKA, the Modern Social Security and Public Administration Office. It is a place of absolute modern mundanity.
Oh, totally. People go there to wait in line, shuffle paperwork, deal with the endless bureaucracy of daily life.
But in late 1992, construction crews were excavating the plot to build this very structure, and their shovels hit something massive. They uncovered an entire section of the city's ancient Eastern cemetery, 30 distinct graves.
30 graves, just the bureaucracy of the living being constructed directly on top of the bureaucracy of the dead.
The archaeological reports from that dig highlight this profound continuous use of the land. It wasn't just a temporary burial site. They found one grave from the Hellenistic period, a massive concentration from the Roman era, and a walled enclosure containing 3 vaulted tombs from the early Byzantine period. So for centuries, this specific plot of dirt was where the city processed its mortality. And the structural variety of these tombs is incredible. 16 of them were brick-built, box-shaped tombs. Some of the grander Roman ones even had their interior walls carefully lined with marble.
And the city and the archaeologists actually made a brilliant decision here. They didn't just document the graves and pave over them. They preserved the remains in the semi-basement of the IKA building, behind a massive glass facade at street level.
Which is so cool. As a pedestrian walking down Angelaki Street today, you can literally look down through the glass and stare into an ancient necropolis, while government employees process tax forms right above your head.
It creates this stunning visceral connection for the modern citizen.
Yep.
But among all those grand marble-lined Roman tombs, they uncovered a detail that bridges the millennia through sheer human grief.
Yeah, the child burial.
Right. They found the burial of a child, and the child wasn't placed in a marble box. They were buried inside an amphora, like a large everyday clay jug.
A mundane household vessel repurposed for a heartbreaking sacred duty. The sources refer to this practice as enkaitrismos. And beside that deeply emotional find, there is another detail from the dig that completely changes how we understand ancient engineering and spirituality.
The clay pipe.
Yes, they found a built tomb shaped like an altar. And on the exterior of this tomb, the ancient builders had specifically designed and attached a clay pipe that ran straight from the surface level down into the interior of the burial chamber.
It functioned as a direct physical line of communication. The boundary between the living and the dead in the ancient world wasn't a closed door. The dead were believed to require ongoing sustenance.
Right, so that clay pipe was installed so that surviving family members could stand on the surface and pour liquid offerings straight down.
Libations like wine, olive oil, or honey, right down into the grave.
An ancient spiritual pneumatic tube system. You literally have ancient Romans pouring wine down clay pipes to feed their ancestors, in the exact same vertical space where modern Greeks are clutching coffee cups and waiting for a bus.
It's incredible. But if we pull our eyes up from that subterranean glass floor and continue our walk down Angelaki Street, the aesthetic violently shifts again. The ancient ghosts disappear, and the 20th century loudly asserts itself.
Because the street serves as a masterclass in the mid-century architectural evolution of Greece. And to understand why the buildings above the ground look the way they do, you have to understand the street's most famous neighbor.
The TIFF, the Thessaloniki International Fair.
Exactly. Angelaki Street forms the western border of the massive TIFF exhibition grounds.
And the International Fair was the beating heart of the region's economy post-war. It was the showcase for industry, innovation, international trade. Because Angelaki Street borders it, the street became the canvas for the city's desperate rush into modernity. It could not afford to look like the past.
It had to look like the future.
You see, that future perfectly encapsulated the north gate of the TIFF, right where Angelaki meets Ignatius Street. In 1966, a towering, abstract steel alloy sculpture by the famous Greek artist George Zongolopoulos was installed there.
It stands 17 or 18 meters high. That's roughly the size of a 6-story building. It is a soaring, raw, industrial monument.
Locals often refer to it as the Corten sculpture, after the specific type of weathering steel used. It was an unapologetic break from classical traditions.
And that drive for industrial modernism bleeds directly into the buildings lining the street. Take the center of architecture at Angelaki 13. This structure is a mid-century experimental playground. The facade is framed by a striking suspended red metal structure.
Inside, they utilized wooden window frames alongside linoleum floors. And today, we might think of linoleum as cheap or dated, but in that era, linoleum was the absolute peak of modern, hygienic, mass-produced flooring.
It signaled a departure from heavy, traditional wood or stone.
But the most fascinating feature of Angelaki 13 is the cellular waffle ceiling.
The waffle ceiling, right.
Yeah, the architects used square plastic molds when pouring the concrete. So when the concrete sets and the molds are removed, you're left with a ceiling that looks exactly like a waffle iron grid.
Why go through the trouble of creating that specific shape, though?
Well, it's structurally brilliant. By creating those empty pockets, you significantly reduce the sheer weight of the concrete slab without sacrificing its structural integrity. It allows the building to have much wider, open interior spaces without needing a forest of support columns blocking the view.
It's lightweight, strong, and visually striking. Brilliant engineering. I have to admit, though, reading through the sources and looking at the broader aesthetic of the street, I find myself highly skeptical of this narrative of pure progress.
Skeptical how?
Well, we talk about the waffle ceilings and the steel sculptures, but a lot of the mid-century concrete apartment blocks lining these streets are notoriously bleak. This massive aesthetic overhaul didn't just happen on a vacant lot. It required tearing down what was already there.
Oh, absolutely. The residential history of the street definitely bears the scars of that transition.
Let's bring it back to Konstantinos Angelakis himself. The Grand Angelakis family residence used to sit right nearby at the corner of Vasilissis Sophias, which is now Ethnikis Aminis and Manousso Giannaki. This was a stunning, historic mansion.
It held so much civic memory that it actually functioned as the official city hall of Thessaloniki from 1931 all the way until 1941.
It even survived the war.
Yeah.
Yet in 1962, right at the peak of this modernization boom, that historic mansion was completely demolished, knocked to the rubble to make way for a standard modern concrete apartment building called Oferos, the lighthouse.
Yeah.
So is replacing a historic mansion with a concrete block truly a necessary evolution, or is it just architectural vandalism masquerading as progress?
That is the central tension of Greek urbanism in the 1960s and 70s. And to understand it, we have to understand the socioeconomic mechanism driving it, a system of anti-parochi. Post-war Greece was financially devastated. At the same time, massive waves of internal migrants were flooding from impoverished rural villages into cities like Thessaloniki looking for work. The state had zero capital to build public housing for these people.
So how do you house a booming urban population with literally no money?
You leverage the land itself. Under the anti-parochi system, a landowner would hand over their plot, which often contained an older, single-family neoclassical home, to a developer for free.
Okay.
The developer absorbs the construction costs to build a multi-story concrete apartment block on that land. In exchange for the land, the original owner gets a few brand new apartments in the finished building to live in or rent out, and the developer sells the rest of the apartments for profit.
It's basically a barter system for real estate development.
Exactly that. It provided immediate housing for the working class and generated massive economic velocity for the construction industry without the government spending a dime.
But the tragic cost, of course, was the wholesale destruction of the city's neoclassical architectural heritage.
Yeah, the demolition of the Angelakis mansion is painful to look back on, but those concrete buildings lining Angelaki Street weren't built out of malice toward history. They were a survival mechanism for a country scrambling to house its people and project economic strength.
They sacrificed aesthetic continuity for sheer functional survival. That context completely changes how you look at the street. It wears its historical trauma and its pragmatic ambitions right on its facades.
It really does.
Which brings us to how Angelaki Street functions as a living organism today. It is not a stagnant museum exhibit.
Not at all. The modern geography of the street dictates a highly energetic contemporary vibe. It borders the TIFF on one side, but on the other, it's just a stone's throw from the Aristotle University campus. Because of that proximity, Angelaki Street is a booming hub for student life.
The sidewalks are packed with cafes, bars, and a constant flow of young people, and it serves as a major media artery for the region, too.
Right, the headquarters for ERT3, the public television broadcasting network for northern Greece, is located right there, alongside several prominent radio stations.
So you have breaking news, cultural debates, and student life all spilling out onto the exact same pavement. And the city has actually made a very deliberate effort recently to weave its deep past into this hyper-modern, media-driven present.
You're referring to the recent environmental and aesthetic upgrades along the avenue.
Yeah. The city cut down the old, decaying poplar trees that used to line the road. But instead of planting cheap, quick-growing saplings, they orchestrated something incredibly symbolic. They brought in massive, century-old olive trees, transporting them all the way from the Halkidiki Peninsula and planted them down the length of Angelaki Street.
The olive tree is the most timeless, enduring symbol in Greek culture. So dropping century-old roots into a mid-century concrete corridor is a profound statement.
And they took it a step further. They installed specialized lighting directly beneath the trunks. At night, when you're walking out of a student bar or finishing a late-night edit at the TV station, these massive, gnarled olive trees are illuminated from below.
The sources describe them as looking like strange sculptures guarding the avenue.
It perfectly synthesizes the entire journey we've been on. The sheer density of human experience packed into this one small stretch of the city is staggering. Think about the sensory walk we just took.
Yeah, you can walk out of a high-tech television studio, grab an iced coffee from a cafe packed with university students arguing about politics, stand under the shade of a transplanted olive tree that has been growing for 100 years.
Look up at a giant 1960s steel monument to industrial progress, and then lean over a rail to look through a pane of glass at a Roman grave. You experience all of this on a street named after a brilliant doctor who redesigned the city from ashes but couldn't convince 400 people to vote for him.
Time when Angelaki Street just does not move at a straight line. It layers on top of itself decade after decade, constantly overwriting the hard drive but keeping the old files running silently in the background.
That idea of layers brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. I cannot stop thinking about that child buried in the amphora beneath the modern IK building.
It's such a stark, haunting image.
It really is. Every single day, we walk above these subterranean spaces. We are completely consumed by the urgency of our modern lives. We're rushing to university classes, we're scrolling on our phones, we're grabbing a quick coffee, or we're stressing about getting our Social Security paperwork stamped by a clerk.
We operate under the illusion that our specific layer of the city is the permanent one.
We genuinely believe we're the final draft. But all we are doing with our grand mid-century buildings, our bustling cafes, and our urgent daily errands is adding one more paper-thin, temporary layer of pavement over thousands of years of interrupted stories.
We're just the current temporary residents of the top layer.
So the provocative question is this. When someone inevitably digs up Angelaki Street 1,000 years from now and peers through whatever future glass wall they build to look at us, what exactly will our layers say about who we were?
That is a question that completely changes how you experience your next walk down any city street.
It really does. Well, we want to remind you one final time that this exploration was brought to you as part of the podcast, The Street Has Its Own Story, by Giannis Stefanidis. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Until next time, keep looking beneath the surface.